it's also an opportunity for us to get to know each other and get even deeper in that community building component. So we'll be spending a little bit of time in conversation, and by that I mean a lot of time in conversation, mostly because you all chose to sign up for a class called Strange Jewish Story. All of these stories are kind of intended to make us a little bit uncomfortable. They're things that we don't usually hear as part of our Jewish narrative, things that aren't like the things that you would tell a kindergartner kind of stuff. They're intended to be complicated and challenge us and to kind of make us extra think about what is Judaism for each of us and how do I relate. And so part of that question is to get us thinking about, what is my experience already with Judaism, and where am I willing to push myself? Am I willing to push myself in that relationship? And so one thing that I want to say is in our exploration of maybe these slightly uncomfortable places of our Jewish community and culture and storytelling, I also want to be able to set a couple of intentions. And I'm part of a working group through an organization called Keshet, which focuses on Jewish LGBTQ education and advocacy. And I love the intentions. The Hebrew word is kavanah, so the plural is kavanot. Intentions that they set for the conversations that they help lead, and I think it'll probably help us with our conversations as well. So one thing that I'm hoping that we'll be able to do is take space and make space. Each of us has our own ideas and our own curiosities, our own questions. I want us to be able to feel comfortable saying them out loud, typing comments, reacting, whatever that looks like. Take the space that is your space, please. And notice when maybe someone hasn't taken their own space yet. Either if I'm not recognizing a hand or a thought that's percolating, call me out on it. But also, to say, like, I've taken my space, I want to make sure that someone else has their space too. So balancing both of those needs. Also, because a lot of these conversations are intended to challenge us, we're going to be doing a lot of storytelling, a lot of our own personal storytelling. There's so much to learn from our experiences. I want us to be able to do that, and also to know that a lot of us, those stories are. So when we're taking the things that we're learning from this class, take the lessons, bring it beyond our group, absolutely. But when we're sharing those stories, allow them to be personal and even allow them to be private. So take lessons, leave the stories. Prepare for non-closure. I think that this one is relatively self-explanatory. We're not going to solve the problems of the Jewish world. We're not going to come up with a, bottom of the page bolded, this is what Jews believe, because all of us know that anytime you get more than one Jew in a room, you're going to get twice as many opinions as you have. So be prepared. We're not going to get closure in these conversations. Stay present as much as possible. That might mean choosing a way of interacting either digitally or in person. Shows how things will go for other sessions. But also, if you can't be present, that's also totally fine. Feel free to listen, feel free to participate, and try to allow for those opportunities for other people to be present too. If you get a phone call, if you get a chat, whatever, just step away. And also, just use that mute button liberally. Feel free to unmute yourself anytime you have something to say, but also mute yourself so that if there's any background noise or anything like that, at this point, we're relatively familiar with the functioning of Zoom. Also, last one, super important, have fun. I have super nerded out to all of these stories. And I know none of that is a surprise to any of you, that I can be a really big Jewish nerd. We're gonna have a lot of fun with this, and maybe we will have known the stories beforehand. Likelihood is we won't know any stories, so play with the material. Ask really ridiculously hard questions, or just really ridiculous questions, because that's also the part of our tradition that we live in every day, and we kind of move in and out of. So feel free to play with our assumptions, our preconceived notions, what Judaism is and its purpose. Have a lot of fun with that. I invite you to get on board this nerd train with me. Awesome. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Anything to add, edit, or subtract?
Why we're here, right?
It is why we're here. We're gonna have a little bit of fun with some strange Jewish stories, and likelihood is each of us have our own strange Jewish story to tell as well. So maybe those will come out too. So before we jump in, any other questions, logistical stuff, anything that helps us be even more present? Thoughts, comments?
No, I just want you to know that I sent you, and only you, just a link to a page of just what you went through, like cornerstones for a conversation, just so you know, like just another version.
Yeah, perfect.
Just so you know.
I saw, and it's
you were talking. I know. So I just wanted, and if you don't get it, I can email it to you, because I know that we added a couple more that I thought were also good. But they're way more than we need. I just thought you want it for the future.
Thank you. I'm always looking for new content, so thank you. Dean.
I wanted to say to Emily, her hair looks beautiful.
Oh, that's because it's half wet still. It's not all frizzed out, and I haven't picked at it through work yet. But thank you so much, Jeannie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a very important conversation.
It's also very white right here. It needs to be done.
I don't know if you can see my dad kind of doing up his few strands of hair in there. You look very pretty. So, introduction to the Trafe Banquet. Anyone ever heard of this phrase before? Yes, no?
Trafe?
Oh, no. Excellent. Not that many. Oh, Joel, I see your hand.
Oh, heard of Trafe, but not the Trafe Banquet.
Excellent. So the Trafe Banquet, as the name suggests, it was a day in Reformed Jewish history that the Jews served all the treif. And in order to start explaining what happened on July 11th, 1883 in Cincinnati, Ohio, a little bit of background. So in our Torah, in Parshat Shmini, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, we have a very basic description of kashrut. What food is kosher, what food is not kosher. Anything that has cloven hooves and chews its cud is kosher. Thank you, cows. Anything that is a bottom feeder, anything that it has, almost anything that has an exoskeleton, so like shellfish, pork, not kosher. There's also a line in there that says you should not boil a kid in its mother's milk, which the interpretation becomes do not mix milk. That is the Torah command, a very abbreviated version of the Torah command. Anything from the Torah that God tells people do this or don't do that, that's a mitzvah. That's a commandment. The rabbis, all the generations of them, say, well, that's not detailed enough. I need a lot more explanation. And they come up with a system of halakha, rabbinic law that clarifies and builds on mitzvah. And that's where we get, you have to wait a certain amount of time between milk and meat laws. That's where we get some of the conversation between milk plates and meat plates and Passover plates. That's where we get a lot of that conversation about hechsher. A hechsher means a stamp or like a seal of a, meaning it has to have rabbinic action there. So we get a lot of that halakha in the rabbinic. And then there's all the varieties of ways that Jews choose to practice kashrut or not practice kashrut. They're going to be kosher at home, but it's really difficult outside of their home. So when they eat in a restaurant, they're going to eat non-hechsher. They're going to be, oh, it's still cutting out. Sorry. I'm sorry. Let's.
This one maybe. Keep letting me know how the sound is going. Thank you, Brian. No, but Alan says no. Okay. All right. Please hold. I'm going to switch over to using my phone as a microphone, but it takes a second to set up. So hang on. Jeez, this is not easy. Okay. 1312. Fun fact, you can also use your cell phone as a microphone for Zoom. Come on, call. Okay. 883-3756-9288. Aren't you loving this excellent content here? So exciting.
More nerdiness.
300360 pound.
In the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, how's this? Any better?
Better, yes, much better.
Great. Sorry, I'll figure out what's wrong with my computer in a minute. Okay, so all the variety of ways that Jews choose to practice the halakha, which is based off of the mitzvah, that we call a minhag. The customs or practices of the Jews in a particular community or personal choice, right? So you've got three levels of how someone learns about kashrut. That's the like Jewish background. Here's the historical background. Jews show up in America very early in this country's history, even before the War of Independence. Jews have been here for a very, very long time. And Reform Judaism begins in Germany around the early to mid 1800s. Think of every stereotype you know about German Jews. That's what they were. Very punctual, very formal. They were basing their practice off of the Protestant community that surrounded them because that's where people were choosing to be. That's where we get the organ from. That's where praying in your spoken language comes from. And then the Jews moved en masse to this country, including Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, who essentially his nickname is the father of Reform Judaism in America. He saw the world around him based on German Jewish practice and said, there's so many Jews here in this community. Why can't we create an American Jewish practice? Why can't we be American Jews? Why do we need to be German Jews who live in America? And so he started by moving first to Albany, New York, and started doing a lot of the reforms that we now know, equality in practice and ritual between the genders, anything that a man can do, a woman can do, and the other way around. Moving away from bat mitzvah and towards confirmation, because boys and girls can do it, but also because the age of confirmation is a little bit more developed, and a child would, in theory, be better able to say, this is what I believe in, Judaism is for me. Now we can say that a 16-year-old might be a little bit young for that, but back in the 1800s, they were practically adults at that point. Mixed gendered seating, all fun things like that. Eventually, as trailblazing reformers tend to do, he got in a little bit of trouble with the establishment and the board of his Albany community. And so he ends up moving to Cincinnati and becoming the rabbi of a congregation that we now know as the Plum Street Temple, also known as Isaac Mayer Wise Synagogue. That's when he starts to create all of the Reformed Jewish institutions that we know of in this country. HUC, Hebrew Union College, the only Reformed seminary in this country, is founded by Isaac Mayer Wise and friends. The URJ, which at that point was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the UAHC, Isaac Mayer Wise founds and friends. He creates the first American prayer book that he calls Minhag America, translating to American practice. And it's mostly in English with a couple prayers that are like cornerstone prayers, like the Shema and Kaddish are in the original language, but it's really English heavy. He starts to create all of the institutions of Reform Judaism. And then the very first celebration of the very first rabbis ordained in this country, July 11th, 1883. He and his friends decide to throw a party in the style of the rest of the Cincinnati and American community. He and his friends book a hotel, a resort called the Highland House, where all sorts of other high society functions happen. They invite over 200 of the kind of the elite of the Reformed Jewish community, and they have a huge party. It's also it's the first graduating class of rabbis from Hebrew Union College, the 10th anniversary of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and the 8th meeting of the Advisory Council for the UAHC. So like all the muckety mucks are showing up in one place. And the Cincinnati Enquirer the next day publishes a little bit of a review, but the menu of this event. See if you can notice anything about this menu that might be like, this is a little weird. This is the original. I have a translated version here. So we have the first course is little neck clams. The second course is mutton. The third course is beef and crabs and potato and shrimp salad. We've got an entree of sweetbreads with peas. We've got, I couldn't figure out how to translate releve into English. So breaded chicken, and you bread chicken by dipping it in milk, with pate and frog's legs. We've got some pigeon wings. We've got some olive and sardines, and I have no idea what a Bristonis is. And then we've got ice cream and cheese. Anything that you notice might be a little bit weird for a party of Jews?
Not kosher.
It's not kosher. By any standards, it's not kosher. So
No, it's
we've got
it's totally Trafe, entirely from
Yeah.
start to finish.
If it's not kosher, it's should be right.
So now you can see why it gets the name the Trafe Banquet. It breaks so many mitzvot rules, right? There's the crab and the shrimp and right, all of these exoskeleton animals. Don't eat that. Also, it's mixing milk and meat in the same meal. Don't do that. Alon, I saw that face. Apparently it's not tasty to you. Right? So much of this makes you think, what the heck were they thinking? And so we have a number of back and forth in pretty public Jewish newspapers judging what's happening at this banquet. Remember, all the elite of American Jews are at this banquet. What do you think they say?
It's fine and dandy, or did they think it wasn't cool? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the possible answers, it's fine. This is what Americans do. This is what we eat. Why do you have any issues with that? Great. Other possible answers.
Are you nuts?
Are you nuts? Why would you serve this? Did anyone even eat this food? I can't believe that this was a menu at a Jewish event. Any other possibilities? Vicky and then Alan Tarover.
It's such a statement. It's not subtle. I mean, it's like hitting them with a hammer. This is who we are. This is where we are now. This is today. That's not yesterday. This is where we're going from. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, this is who we am. Deal with it. And this is what Jews are going to be in this country moving forward. Get on board or get out. Great. Alan Tarover.
Even though it was so Trafe, even though it was a reform group, it did show a lack of respect for anyone who came who wasn't completely on board yet.
Yeah, right. This is the first ordination class. Shirley, I see your hand. This is the first ordination class of American rabbis, which means other than those 4 people, everyone else got their Jewish education from the old country, right? It shows a little bit of a lack of respect of like, yeah, you might be bringing your own traditions with you over here and having to deal with that. Shirley. And then Brian.
This is a joke.
Yeah, you know, it gets published in the newspaper and someone goes like, is this April Fool's Day? Like, what's going on? You can't be serious. Brian and then Alon, did I see your hand?
So the question remains, this is now done Jewry in America, of a reform, of the fledgling reform movement, but it had its origins in Germany. What was either German reaction or what was the practice in Germany at that point in time?
Okay, so excellent question. The kind of standard of practice this is looking back on it because no one actually wrote it down, that this is what Jews do now. In the majority of practicing Jewish houses in America and in practicing Jewish houses in Germany are some form of kashrut, not like the strict kashrut that we would expect in like Skokie right now, not necessarily hechshered kashrut, but you know, no eating pork, no eating shellfish. Maybe some people were eating chicken parm, but it's unclear. But what's the one thing that is missing from this menu? If it's the Trafe Banquet, I'm going to show it to you one more time. What's one piece of trait? Oh, okay, I don't need to show it to you.
It was pork. I mean,
Shelley.
there was no pork.
Oh, pig.
No pork. Shelley and Emily?
Oh, I
Add,
said-
edit,
Pork, unless the brissetins are pork.
unless the thing that I don't know what it actually is pork. I don't think so, but
I don't think so either. But like,
Vicky,
this is
yeah.
so outrageous. Like,
Brissetine is a molded thing. Something
Oh,
that's
and they
molded.
asked it.
oh, if it's molded, then it could use the gelatin then.
It
And
could be
don't forget, a lot of the
acid.
gelatins were not quite
Yeah.
kosher either. So, but it's kind of, like, what are they, tomatoes? It's something that's molded with it, like a gushy stuff. I don't know.
Like Jello.
We studied this.
Maybe like a meat jello of some form. I heard that was popular back in the day.
Something, yeah.
But looking back on it, the thing that most people notice is missing when they start to really analyze this event is that pork was a step too far. We can have 5 different kinds of shellfish, but pork, God forbid. And so we get pretty much every single reaction that you've mentioned. And a lot of back and forth between the community that experienced it in Cincinnati and then the Jews of the East Coast. I'm sure that's not something we experience in the Midwest at all anymore. There's no East Coast Midwest competition, except there totally is. But it is so strong in this conversation. And so just to give a little bit of a hint of what some of that back and forth was, immediately after the event, Cincinnati Enquirer says, the banquet was the most brilliant ever. The arrangements were complete in every detail and providing every possible comfort. It was a good party. And then about a week and a half later, the New York Herald goes, what? You can't be serious. It was a painful episode, which on the menu included, here I'll zoom in a little bit more, dishes that were forbidden by Jewish law. And yet, rabbis and laymen assembled, and instead of rising as a body and leaving the hall, they sat down and participated. AKA, the Jewish Herald is saying, are you guys actually insane? This is not okay. Why did you allow this to happen? And then, originally, Henrietta Zold is the daughter of Rabbi Zold, another one of those big American Jewish community makers. And we believe that she was there because he was invited. She was his +1. But originally, she writes this anonymously in the Jewish Messenger in Pennsylvania. 2 rabbis left the table without touching their dishes. 3 more sat and ate nothing, which leaves at least 195 guests unaccounted for. Probably they ate what was put in front of them. Also, another thing that I translate in the menu was each individual course included its own alcoholic beverage. And so the scholarship looking back on it also comments on just how trashed everyone must have been by the end of this party. So it's something like 8 courses and 8 glasses of varying alcohols. So finally, Isaac Mayer Wise, who has his own Jewish publication, starts to feel the need to respond because most of these East Coast journals, East Coast newspapers, mention him by name. How dare Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise allow this to happen? And hating on him begins to be hating on the American Jews as a group. He is the representative for all Reform Jews. And he says, well, the cook and the caterer and everyone else, like, they were Jews. We didn't feel the need to get involved. They should have known. I didn't pay for this. They paid for it. Why are you getting mad at me when it should be them that you're getting mad at? And it is arrogant and unfair to drag these matters into the public forum. If you have an issue, talk to me directly. Don't put it in the news. Please, oh please, don't put it in the news. Clearly that didn't work, because a couple months later, I couldn't find a specific date citation for this. He starts to say, the only law that's higher than the dietary laws that we have in our religion is don't be a fanatic. Be intelligent, allow your reason to govern your passions. So he's getting real mad here, to the point that eventually, a couple of years later, right now we're in 1895, this is 7 years later, he says that there is no doubt the oyster is the same as fish that have scales. They might as well be vegetables of the sea. Why are you getting mad at me? And it goes on and on and on. Until finally, one of those 4 rabbis who was ordained publishes a memoir in 1941, 60 years later, and starts to say all of these details about what happened at the affair. He talks about the elaborate menu, how it was at a very swank and fancy hotel, etc., etc. And he is the one who says that only 2 people walked out of the room. Also, he starts to quote the menu and clearly gets it wrong. He says that shrimp was the first course, and we have the menu that says it was the oysters, etc., etc. He gets a lot of details wrong. So from his autobiography is where academic scholarship starts to come in, and saying, what is it that these Jews are trying to do? Who gets to decide how Jews practice? Who gets to be in charge of that? And they use the Trafe banquet as their example of someone who's either choosing things for themselves. They sit down at the table and they are more than happy to eat what's served to them, or someone who is quite knowledgeable in Judaism, but looking in from the outside, isn't necessarily directly affected, but still believes that they get a say. And so that's our question for the rest of our time. We're going to enter into a little bit of the debate. Who gets to say how Jews practice? Do we have our own Trafe banquets? And whatever the, ivory towers on the other side of the country say, like, they can say it, but let's try to keep it out of the public forum. Or does what someone who doesn't have an immediate effect on your practice, do they actually get a say? That's our question. Who gets to decide how Jews practice? Joel, at least I think that's your hand, because I can't tell whose hand is yours and Sue's.
Well, we're very close. The real question is, who's asking? From what point of view are you judging? Is it the rabbinical board in Jerusalem? Or is it the Reform Jewish movement that's asking? I know that the Pittsburgh platform took place only a couple years later, and they were probably readying American Jews of the Reform persuasion for the recognition that American Judaism was going to be way different, that there was no interest in kosher, and like you said, no bar mitzvahs, just confirmation. And I think there was something in there about not wanting a Jewish homeland or anti-Zionism, whatever. So this was the first shot across the bow of traditional Judaism, I think. And it was how they felt. Okay, that's all I got.
Okay, wait a minute. And I wanted to say that I felt that one of the problems would be that we would be able to face ourselves. I know people that kept kosher in their home and would eat bacon out. Now, I didn't eat bacon, but they did, and I don't keep kosher. So it's really what you as a self person wants to do. So that's who judges us, ourselves.
Yeah, and that essentially becomes the argument, is the individual versus the community. And then the really hard part of that is defining the community. Who's in, who's out? Who gets to say, who gets to have authority, and who is, you're Jewish, but you're not my kind of Jewish, right? And so, Joel, you make a great point that Pittsburgh platform, which is essentially viewed as the Declaration of Independence for American reformers. It says, we don't need a homeland in that land that now, post-1948, we call Israel, because we feel really comfortable in the land that we live in. We don't believe in a Messiah because we don't believe that there's some magical being that's coming to save us, right? All of these various things that American Reform Jews have made a statement about. Kashrut is not one of those statements in the Pittsburgh platform. Apparently, it's an action more than a word statement. But both of you are right? Who's asking? And for right now, it's the 21 screens of us. And what do we say to them when the box over there disagrees with the box over there? How do we resolve that difference? Alan Tobin and then Brian Heath.
I have a question about what is the position of Temple Jeremiah as a temple. I've attended many events, so I have some idea that there are some exclusions from the dietary list, but I've never been involved in really planning a food event at the temple, so I don't know what our stance is.
So the official Jeremiah policy is we do not serve food that is inherently trafe, no pork, no shellfish, that kind of stuff. We do not require a hechsher. We don't require the food that we buy to be overseen by some rabbinic authority. We can buy something off the jewel shelf. And if an individual chooses to mix milk and meat, they may do so. But we won't serve a dish like chicken parm. We'll have chicken, and you can add cheese if you want on your own plate. So we don't have milk and meat dishes. We don't have Passover specific dishes. That's how we allow for that personal choice. That's the 5-second version.
It's interesting that since I've been a member of Jeremiah and came from a background starting out with a very Orthodox congregation and gradually moving down or up or whichever way you want to look at it, that the number of people that to whatever they choose to consider keeping kosher at home, the number of people that have told me that they do keep kosher at home in some fashion at Jeremiah is perhaps equal to, or in some cases higher than other congregations that I've been involved in that were supposedly had absolute rules for doing it.
Yeah, and it's not like we have a question on our membership forms. Do you keep kosher? Will you eat at Temple Jeremiah? It's not a standard that we hold our Jewish practice to. We have these policies of Jeremiah, mostly twice about it, but it's not, we serve food all the time. Someday we will serve food all the time. It's not, the way we practice our Jewish food practice is not it's not the largest conversation of how we do Jewish at Jeremiah. We talk mostly about social justice, about worship, about learning, right? Those kinds of actions. We talk way less about the quality of our Jewish kitchen.
I mean,
Brian.
Isn't part of the concept of Reform Judaism making informed choices? And as such, understanding what rabbinical laws are and whether or not you choose to follow them, but not just whether or not you choose to follow them, but understanding why you choose to follow them or not. And in that regard, when you talk about what the policies of Jeremiah or any institution are, is it not a combination of what the community feels as a whole, yet at the same time trying to be reasonably respectful of those who choose to follow one manner or another?
Yeah, and that becomes, when I was growing up, I drank every single cup of Reformed Jewish Kool-Aid that they offered me. The phrase was choice through knowledge, which meant that at some point you had to acquire knowledge in order to make a choice. I don't know about your Jewish upbringings. No one told me about kashrut. They said, we don't do that, but they didn't give the details to it. They just assumed the way that my Jewish community at home, at camp, on my trips, that's just what we do. If you really want to know about it, it's going to take so much explanation. Do we have time for that? And, part of it is, do we have time to explain every single thing that we do? Not really, right? We'd be here forever. But then is that responsibility put on the individual to start asking a lot of questions? Absolutely. And that's where a lot of Reform Judaism gets its power is by that the individual opting in rather than the community and not letting go, hands of the individual. For better or for worse, right? It comes with pros and cons. That's not necessarily true for more traditional Jewish communities. Kaufman, I saw that you moved to the corner of my screen. Does that mean that you had a digital hand up or no? No, great. You're maybe frozen. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Oh, you're so much quieter than I thought you would be. Phyllis Berg and then Phyllis Mitzen.
What are we
and then Jean.
What are we teaching our kids in religious school? Is it even talked about?
I think it's talked about when we have, for some of the older elementary and middle school and older like that, we have some ask the clergy tough question sessions. And sometimes it comes up there. I think that our 5th and 6th graders in their life cycle curricula get a little bit of a taste of what kosher is, but I don't think we spend any significant amounts of time teaching our kids what kosher is and what it means and how to do modern versions of kosher that don't require a rabbi stamp on something. I don't think we spend a lot of time talking about it. Phyllis Mitzen, Jean Burke, Barry, and then Brian.
Just very quickly, I think from my generation, it was kind of moving from a kosher house to making choices about how we wanted to raise our children. And whether or not my father would be comfortable, who was on the Orthodox side of conservative, would he eat at our house? And we brought our children up with the idea that we just don't eat meat, or we don't eat pork or shellfish. But I think, joining a Reformed synagogue, first another one and now Jeremiah, I think it just forces us over time to think about how we're making those choices and to educate ourselves. And I think that it's just been an evolution. But I think people need to start from somewhere. And but I think what Reform does is just kind of allows people to be either thoughtful or not thoughtful about it, but to connect with Judaism somehow. Thank you.
Yeah. Having to make a decision about every single thing is a lot, right? It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of research. Some things are allowed to just be easy. This is what my parents taught me. This is what I do. I don't need to ask a lot of questions. In some things, I see my dad shaking his head like you asked a lot of questions when you were a kid, and I wish that you would shut up. But the question then becomes like, absolutely, some things should just be easy. Let's let them be easy. How do we know which things are worth being easy and which things are worth asking questions about? And sometimes we get those cues from the people around us. And sometimes we kind of get that cue from what's inside of us, right? Like, I feel a little bit weird about this. I feel like I need to ask questions, whether or not the people around us want to let us ask them. Jean, Barry, Brian, Shirley. Unmute. There we go.
Okay. I was brought up in a kosher home, Orthodox home. My parents sent me to Hebrew school, parochial school, College of Jewish Studies. There was never a doubt that my mother did not want me to attend a public school because, God forbid, I would fall in love with a Gentile. And when I got married, I kept a kosher home. Chaim the butcher delivered the meat every week, and my children didn't know any different. They knew this is Chaim coming. As the little one used to run to the door and be so excited to see him. And this is the way I brought up my children. It doesn't mean that they followed me all the way down to this day. They made their own choices, some not so good, some okay. But to me, and because I was so taught for so many years, kosher, Jewishness, religion, I didn't know any other way. I couldn't think of not being kosher or eating pork or, God forbid, shellfish. But things change.
Yeah, and change is always uncomfortable, and parents seeing kids making decisions, usually uncomfortable, one way or another, whether you approve of their decisions or not. But giving kids independence, no matter how old they are, like there's a little, are they going to do the right thing? Am I going to approve of this? There's a lot of that generational conversation, even more, as much as the different communities conversation. And it becomes really hard when you see someone making a choice that's not the choice that you would make. Absolutely. Barry, Brian, Shirley.
I have a little different take on the purpose of kashrut. If you look at Jewish society in previous centuries, they were forced to live outside of the mainstream. If they ate different, they had to live different, and they had to stay together. Therefore, they couldn't join the other society, the Gentile society. So it helped them maintain their identity. That may not be as true today. I also have a little idea about shellfish. I think in that group of, I think it was 40 rabbis that laid out all the laws. which is only 700-800 years ago. One of them had a shellfish allergy, and one of the relatives may have died from shellfish. So that would be a very good reason not to eat
The
shellfish.
sacred pig.
Well, there are a lot of possibilities, right? We never get in the Torah, this is how you should eat because. God rarely says the because part of it. Some people say it's a way to remain separate. Some people say it's like an early version of a health code, right? Like allergies, right? There's lots of different reasons that kashrut could exist. We won't actually ever get that answer because the Torah doesn't say so. But what is interesting in a different way, and Barry, you're almost getting to this. So the movements of Judaism that we know now, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Haredi, Renewal, like all of that, didn't exist until Reform Jews started doing their reforming in Germany. Before that, there wasn't a rabbinic authority. There wasn't a organized Jewish community in the way that we know now. There was the Jews over in that town practice that way, and the Jews over in that town practice that way, and wherever town you happen to be, practice along the lines of that town. Right? There wasn't these like huge movements, partly because there wasn't the same globalization that we have now. So there wasn't necessarily someone looking over there and saying, you're doing it wrong. You need to change how you're doing it. It was just, this is what we do, and that's what we accept. Shirley and then Brian.
Well, pretty much what Jean said. I came from a kosher family, and I've relaxed some of the things, but I could never have milk and meat or eat any kind of a pork product. But everybody makes their own choices. Some people will go to a movie on Shabbos, but not shop. I mean, they make their own rules. The other thing is, when I kept Passover, I want to say that I had one big frying pan for fried matzah. And when this pan came out, my dog went crazy. He remembered the fried matzah pan from the year before.
But it's sweet or savory matzah brie?
What?
Because is it sweet or savory? Rabbi Cohen loves a good savory matzah brie, and I had never had that before I moved here.
Oh, wow.
Again, Jews doing weird things all over the place. Brian and then Vicky and Barry.
What this whole conversation with regard to the Trafe banquet, it goes back primarily in my mind to the question of choice. Now, what I said before is following the laws of kashrut or many of the other things are supposed to be an informed choice in what you make. But turning the tables on you, my daughter, for a moment, I mean, when we talk about informed, I mean, certainly you've had the Jewish education, I'm going to assume more than most of the individuals on the screen here. I'm assuming, I don't know that I'm right, but certainly at the time that you were at HUC in Israel, you chose at that point in time to follow a kosher style, not mixing milk and meat and not having shellfish, etc. at that point in time. Subsequently, I don't know if it was your first major experience or not, but your brother took you out for sushi and you went to town on it. What, as a rabbi, okay, what made you make some of those choices?
See, I was going to get to this at the end. But though I realize it's 8:07 and I promised we'd only go until 8. If you have to go, I totally understand, but also we like to talk. And, Brian, I'm going to turn this back on you. You're remembering the timeline a little bit differently. To which mom, Diane, is going, yeah, it was way earlier than that. I think I was 13 or 14 and decided, I want to try to be a little bit more active in my Jewish choices. I'm sure this is not how I said it to you at that Chinese restaurant in Florida, but that I wanted to try keeping kosher. I remember I also chose like a really bad time to dump this on my parents. Really awkward. But I wanted to experiment with being a little bit more traditional in some of my Jewish choices. And so I chose not to mix milk and meat. I chose not to eat, obviously, trafe things. I still had to have my glass of milk with every dinner. And I didn't have a separate meal from the rest of my family. So those were some of the standards that my own Jewish authorities, also known as my mother, tried to create. But for almost 15 years, I chose to keep a version of kosher. And then I found in my 4th year of rabbinical school, so rabbinical school is 5 years, in my 4th year, I was keeping kosher for Passover, like you, Shirley, and felt like I was missing out on a lot of experiences because I wasn't allowed to eat certain things. And decided after Passover, one of the ways that I learn about the world is by eating food of the world. And so I need to have more opportunities to eat food of the world. So I went to another one of my rabbinic classmates, and then I went to my younger brother, who's a little bit of a foodie, said, you know what I really need? I need a trafe tutor. And went on tours of Manhattan and of New York, learning how to eat trafe and learning how to what my personal tastes were, what if there was a line that I felt uncomfortable crossing. Turns out there's not. I just like food. What I needed someone to teach me about this part of the world that I hadn't experienced since I was a young teenager. Mom, I see you've been ready to say things, and I'm sure embarrass me.
No, so Brian and I had 3 children. We have 3 children. One chooses not to eat trafe at home. One would eat things that I wouldn't even ever consider. And then there was Rabbi Rachel, who was in between and who likes to sort of try things different ways.
Yeah, and it becomes that symbol of Reformed Jews in the world is everyone has ended up making their own choices. So is there not only a debate that's worth having in there, but also then what is the community practice that gives us connection in there? And I would say that is probably, when I think about our family community practice around food, I think a lot about our Hanukkah family reunions and chicken fricassee, like a stewed chicken dish. To me, that, chicken wings and matzo balls that's been stewed for a while, that's our Jewish practice of food. That, to me, that's what Judaism tastes like. But, is there something that gets us back in the community practice, even when we're choosing our own individual ways of finding Judaism? Alan Turover, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Rabbi, this is Joan. Joan
yeah, Joan.
Yes. Rabbi Tarshish of blessed memory used to say that Reform Judaism was like a buffet table, and we take from it what is meaningful to us.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet Rabbi Tarshish, our founding rabbi. But my understanding is that he still kept a version of kosher, but not very. He wasn't particularly strict about his personal kashrut. but he also knew that when he was having Shabbat services in his living room and Torah study, that he had an expectation of upholding certain Jewish community standards that let people be in that room. Joan, you'll have to say more about that because you actually knew Rabbi Trafe.
Right. Well, those Friday evening services in his living room, he insisted that each board member at least bring one more person. And that's how he doubled his congregation at that time. But I have always remembered that from a long time ago. The buffet table, we take from it what is meaningful to each of us, and then it's important. It takes on its importance then.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got all of those options of Judaism, and hopefully you'll fill up your plate. Alan, you're over.
I have a little different thought here. We've been talking about choice as if choice is really a wonderful thing. Choice is a high principle. Choice is something that Reform Jews should, that's what makes us different, and it sort of elevates us. But I think we have a little bit of a slippery slope there in that people who keep kosher, who understand the reasons why they keep kosher, I think have a richer understanding of Judaism than people who just say, no, I don't understand why you shouldn't mix meat with milk. I mean, you know, the chance that in a modern dairy that drop of milk would come in with and forgetting about the disrespect for a human here. I think we can lose all that if we just say the choice is what's all important. It's not just choice. I think that if Judaism is to continue, it has to be informed choice. And when I see the number of people who actually attend learning events at Temple Jeremiah, it's a little bit discouraging. This group excluded, of course. But when people just think it's all my choice, I don't have to follow any tradition, and they don't understand the tradition, I think they're losing some Judaism.
Well, and I think that we all learn in different ways and from different sources. That, you know, I'm always happy to have classes and group discussions like this is my jam. But I'm also really happy to read, you know, journal articles and to hear about how those people over there do that thing. And how does all of this fit into my picture of what is Jewish? What do I do Jewish, and what community do I belong to? Right. And the people who ask the questions, regardless of what answer they come up with, you know, I so want to celebrate them. You know, I teach an Intro to Judaism class every year with a bunch of other clergy on the North Shore. And one of the things that, it's partly for people who are considering conversion, partly for people who are Jew curious, partly for lots of different reasons. And I tell them, you know, I love the fact that I get to do Intro to Judaism classes, because I think that anyone who chooses to engage with Judaism in any way versus the people who kind of just like receive it and say, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Anyone who chooses Jewish, it's such a hard choice and it should be celebrated, right? I was born into this faith tradition. Like I said, I drank every cup of Reform Judaism that was handed to me. And never considered any other movement or any other way of Judaism other than my Reform Jewish upbringing. But someone who chose that for themselves, whether or not they're coming from a different kind of Judaism or even from a totally different faith tradition, that's amazing, right? That is such a strong strength of faith and strength of community that person brings to us and challenges the way that we're seeing our Jewish choices, forces us to ask questions that we didn't think we had to ask before. So hold on to that. Phyllis, I saw your hand and you haven't been able to say very much today. And then I want to add one piece of text and then we'll wrap up.
I just wanted to share my experience with my son, who he was raised in a Reform house, and he chose to become a conservative rabbi, and he keeps a kosher home. I mean, I get in trouble if I use the wrong color sponge when I'm in his house, and he maintains that level of kashrut so that they can entertain people and other people will be comfortable there. But when he decided to make those choices, it was very important to me that what his choices were not going to interfere with our family being able to be a family, because there were certain factions of my husband's family that were Orthodox, and because of that, they couldn't eat in somebody's house. They couldn't do anything. And it was important to me that he was respectful of his choices, but also respectful of how we can continue to be a family, his choice than mine. I just, I think that there's room for everything. And I don't think that it makes us less Jewish because we make different choices.
Excellent. You don't know this, but you led into our closing text. It's one of my favorite pieces from the book of Pirkei Avot, which comes from a larger work called the Mishnah. Essentially, it's the rabbis going, okay, I need like an idiot's guide to how to do Jewish stuff, taking the commandments from the Torah and starting to work out that rabbinic law component, the halakha. And in this huge conversation, they take half a second, one book out of like 32, one book to talk about value statements rather than action statements. Most of the Mishnah says, build your sukkah this way or eat fruit in that way, whatever. But Pirkei Avot makes value statements rather than action statements. And so in it, they say every dispute that is for the sake of heaven, the phrase is machloket l'shem shamayim, a dispute that is for the sake of heaven, will in the end endure. Alternate translation, will in the end cause to endure. But one that's not for the sake of heaven will not endure. What's a controversy for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Hillel and Shammai, two rabbis at the very beginning of that transition from the temple in Jerusalem, the like capital T temple with sacrifices and everything, to what we start to now know as Judaism, and who had often opposite sides of every single debate. Hillel wins almost every single one of these debates. Shammai wins one of them. But the two of them enter into, they enter into a friendship where each one of them is challenging to clarify their own views and to teach their disciples and their community, what is it that we do as Jews? What's a controversy that's not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korach and his congregation, who in the book of Numbers, Korach is a guy that goes to Moses and says, why do you get to talk all the time? Why do you think you're so special? Aren't we all special? and tried to pull Moses down off of his, what Korach viewed as a pedestal, and kind of destroy all of the community building that Moses was helping them do. What's for heaven? Something that helps us clarify and build on. What's not for the sake of heaven? Something that's intended to tear down and destroy. Whoever causes the multitudes to be righteous, you're good. Sin will not occur on your account. Whatever that righteousness looks like, great. Whoever causes the multitudes to sin, you don't even get the opportunity to repent. If you are helping people have that machloket l'shem shamayim, that dispute for the sake of heaven, all the more power to you. If you are poking, even publicly poking, at someone's kashrut practice or Jewish practice or anything to make them feel bad and to make us feel separate, not cool. And so we get from this Pirkei Avot statement, like, this conversation is exactly what should be happening. We should be wrestling with it. We should be trying to figure out, well, why do I practice the way I practice? Why did my parents tell me that? Why does my community practice this? What is going on? So long as it's for the purpose of building us all up. If we get closer because we have this conversation, even if we don't agree, then it's worth our time. So a little bit of the Trafe banquet. There's clearly a whole lot more content in this text sheet. I tried, this is actually the pared down version. But feel free to keep reading and keep perusing, right? There's a lot of good stuff in here. And thoughts and comments are very, very much encouraged even after we end the Zoom class. Next week, we'll be learning about Lilith. In theory, potentially the very first human being to exist even before Adam, though the rabbis might say she was less of a human being and maybe more of a demon. So we'll get to be introduced to Lilith and what they take from her story. That text sheet will come out again on Monday, and we'll just ask that, you know, every time that we do this, let me know if you're going to be in person or on Zoom, just to make it like a really good quality experience for everyone. I'm going to try to have like a critical mass in any one location. I'm happy to do 2 locations at the same time, Zoom and in person, but I'm hoping for like 4 or 5 people in one space, just to make it that community building experience also. All right, questions, comments, ponderings before we continue? Oh, Emily, yes.
In Torah study, the rabbi gave us a teaser about some kosher food. I don't know if you ever told the rest of the study group, but maybe you could share it now since we had talked about the Trafe banquet.
Oh, great. One of my favorite pieces of Jewish trivia. Let's see if anyone can come up with it. There are 2 kosher foods that are produced by non-kosher animals.
Wow.
Think about what they might be.
Just tell us. I thought about it. Okay.
Vicky has an idea. Honey is one. Excellent. So produced by bees, non-kosher. Honey is kosher. Second one is human beings produce a kosher food, but you cannot eat a human being.
Okay, good night.
Yeah, we'll keep coming up with good stuff.
Yeah.
Rabbi, shellac is kosher and it's produced by insects.
Maple syrup.
Shellac is, Barry, do you eat shellac?
No, but
Not usually, but
maple syrup comes out of a tree. So anyway, you can't eat a tree. I just want to, one quick thing. I don't keep kosher for my own reasons, but I have the sweetest memories with my bubby of helping her when the meat would come, and she would rinse it off and save all that water with the blood in it, and then use that to water her garden. And she had the most gorgeous garden with the bloody water in it. And then salt the meat and rinse. And just spending those moments, sweet, sweet memories. I don't ever want to lose that sweetness, ever.
And I have a sense of where you get your gardening inspiration from.
Yeah,
Where you
well, I
get
come
the
from
blood
both grandmothers, and my mother are just gardeners. One was very precise, almost like an Italian garden, and the other was just throw it in the ground and let it grow. Just amazing.
Ellen, were you going to say something?
The only thing I might add is those couple fellas that left the room, they probably went to the bathroom.
Oh.
On that note, thanks to everyone for joining us. This is part 1 of 5. Everyone stays alone. Feel free to invite friends to join.
It was a lot.
Have a lovely rest of your evening.
It was a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun, Rabbi. Lots of fun.
Thanks for coming, Shirley.
Okay, bye.
Night. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Stay warm.
I didn't ask any questions, Alan.
To me? Yes.
And we're still fit.
All right, friends.
We what?
Good night. I'll see you soon.
See you Friday
night.
night. Good night.